All right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're in our Genesis study. We are now in Genesis 39, and I'm often amazed at the way in which Yahuah has inspired the writing of his scriptures. I've brought this out many a times. There are times where he has a particular train of thought, and then he pauses to bring in something that we'll need further on along down the story. And if you remember last week, we were talking about Judah and Tamar, but that seemed to interrupt the flow of the story, because in Genesis 37, verse 6, it says, "Now the Midianites had sold him," speaking of Joseph, "in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard." Genesis 38 jumps in Judah and Tamar, and then the first verse of 39 says, "Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt." So it's a chapter in between, so it interrupts the story, and then it picks up again back where the father left off, as we're finding out who our patriarchs are, as we're watching their ways, as we're watching their devotion to Yahuah, their mistakes. And we're also learning and understanding the history of Egypt and how the Israelites landed there and became slaves in Egypt that had to be delivered. But this particular section of Genesis chapter 39 is it's one of the most amazing chapters, because we're going to see some things. And we've already made reference to some of the things people brought out in the last study, in reference to our battle with the flesh and the ruach. And I think a lot of those things are brought out in this chapter, and we'll clearly see. And as we look to, clearly understand what's happening in the story, let's also look to see how our lives parallel with this, what Yahuah is trying to show us in this through the life of Joseph. Because there's something contemporary and historical going on at the same time. And I pray that we all see it as we go through. So let's look at, there are 23 verses. Let's read the first 10 verses. Who wants to take the first 10 verses? Chapter 39. Brother JP.
All right, so chapter 39, Genesis, right?
Yes, sir.
It says here, "And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And Yahuah was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that Yahuah was with him, and that Yahuah made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all the land, that Yahuah blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of Yahuah was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph. And she said, lie with me. But he refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all he hath to my hand. Did you want me to stop on 8? I'm sorry.
10.
Okay, I'm sorry. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against Elohim? And it came to pass that she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. There is a lot in here. I do not want to rush. Let's see through this and pull out everything that Yah is saying to us here. What you see, brother?
Just to jump to verse 5, you know, it's quite interesting to see that, you know, Potiphar, you know, being an Egyptian, it says his house, it says, in the blessing of Yahuah was upon all that he had in the house and in the field because of Joseph. You know what I mean? It was like, so that's an interesting thing, is that I don't know, kind of takes me to the passage in the New Testament that speaks about you know, like, I want to say, like, you're covered, like the wife, between the wife and the husband, and the children being blessed because of the parent, and just this situation. But I mean, in this situation, I mean, of course it's different, but just the idea that he's in Egyptian's house, you know, I'm sure there was idolatry there, you know what I mean? I'm sure there was some things that we wouldn't claim to be good, but his house, the house and all that he had in the field was blessed because of Joseph, a righteous man. So I just want to bring that part up.
Absolutely, man. I mean, there is so much in just that verse you pulled out, you know, because we look at that and we see how back in Genesis 12, Yahuwah promised Abraham that everyone will be blessed by you and your descendants. Everyone will be blessed by you and your descendants. We looked at Jacob and how Lamech, you know, his field was blessed because of Jacob, right? And how when we stand out in the midst of everything that is going on around us, we hold fast. You know, forget about what the world is doing. You know, a lot of times, and I think we need to be concerned about that. Don't take my words incorrectly. We need to be concerned about that and watchful. But in the midst of what the world is doing, what are we doing? Where are our feet planted? What are we saying? What are we not doing? Do we truly live a set apart life? Can they look at us and see the difference? And I think this is what we see with Joseph. There was something different about him that was clearly seen, and Potiphar knew it, and his house was blessed because of it. And we're going to see so much more. This is just the beginning of it. But I want us to think along those lines. You know, the world is the world. The world is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. But Yahuwah said, if my people that are called by my name will humble themselves and turn from their wicked ways. It's us who stand out. It's us who make him make movement in the world because of us. You know, the world is going to do what they're going to do. They're going to follow who they're going to follow. What are we doing to present a contrast to that? If our mouths are shut, if our lives are stagnant, then they have nothing to compare it to, the world that is. You know, let this be a lesson for us to seek to do those things. And I think that verse you pulled out, JP, you know, represents just the beginning of that idea that I want us to keep throughout as we watch Joseph. Brother Mecca, then Brother Gary.
No, I gotta say hallelujah.
Oh, praise Yah, man.
Man, that was getting me excited hearing what you were saying there. You know,
yeah.
I mean, that's a beautiful thing. I got to share this. I left Taos. I mean, you know how I love these things. And the uniqueness of where they're placed is amazing. I mean, let me start. It starts in Genesis 2 here, where it says Yahuah was with Aleph Tav Yosef. So we already know he's in that covenant, that protection down to 5. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that Yahuah Baruch, or he blessed Aleph Tav, the Mitzrayim, the Egyptian's house, for Joseph's sake, and the blessing was upon all that he had in his house and in the field because of Joseph's, obedience, because of, like you said, he's set apart. He's somebody special here. He's in a covenant relationship with his father, his heavenly father. And he knew that he was set apart with the visions that he was given as a child, We go on into 7, and it came to pass after these things that his master's woman cast Aleph Tav her eyes upon Joseph. So I see this woman now, she's got her eyes upon him, and there's a covenant in there somehow. Would you think that that's the case when what she's about to do? So is there a reason that is there, that he's using this to, it's like bringing him down, but to elevate him up? Then I get into 9, there is none greater in this house than I, neither has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are Aleph Tav, his woman, that covenant woman. He don't want to have nothing to do with it. And then he goes in and clarifying why. So how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against Elohim? No way. He had that relationship. He knew. I just see that just beautiful how that all pulls together. When you look at those, they speak to me in another way somehow. I don't know how to explain it. What I see there is just, it's like there's select placement that Yahuah does things for his purpose and his reason, to make a thing happen or to nudge it in that way, ultimately comes down to what the people do, his people, how we respond to that. That's why this is also important, to get ourselves in tune so we don't miss those opportunities. I'm gonna let the rest of y'all speak, but I just had to get that in there because maybe it'll start sparking some other thoughts,
Yeah, no, I see that, the Aleph Tav, with Potiphar's wife, because she is in covenant with another man, and that being the source of his action. She's in covenant, I can't touch it, and there's something else I'm gonna say about that, but I know there's a lot in here, and I want everybody to have an opportunity to open up. I'm not going to rush through this chapter. I think if we do, we are really missing what y'all are saying completely. I'm going to go to Brother Mecca, Brother Gary, and then Brother Israel.
All right, so, the first thing for me, and Rick just touched on it just a little bit there, is, at the end in verse 9, I'll just read the entire verse, but it says, there is none greater in this house than I, neither has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his woman. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against Elohim? Now, normally, somebody in that situation, I mean, you would have at least, for the most part, somebody would have been thinking, oh, how can I sin against your husband? Or how can I, do that? But this just shows you the mindset that we should be walking with, and should be teaching, the youth coming up, that you don't worry about other individuals. You worry first about sinning in the eyes of Elohim. Because if you worry about that, it's going to check you, and it's going to keep you, it's going to keep your character, your image, and for you being a representation of Yahuah, it's going to, keep his image good too in the sight of people, and so just seeing like that, that's how when he checks himself, he's like, how, it's not how can I sin against your husband. It's how can I sin against Elohim? Like I can't do that, you know. And so that to me, you know, stood out a lot because, you know, it's just, it's so important, man. It's so important for people to realize, like, you know, we check ourselves with Elohim first. You know, that's our guide. That's the regulation. And like Scripture says, you know, if you're, you know, one who is in good and standing with Elohim is going to automatically be at peace with his enemies. You know, and so, and I mean, we even see that play out, you know, in this later on, but. Yeah, it's just like, man, I'm just right when I seen that, I was just like, he completely was. It's like he's not even worried about. He's not even worried, you know, about the king. He's like, yo, I'm worried about Elohim. Like I can't do this in Elohim's sight. So I really just love how you know he's standing on that, you know, and how that's his foundation. That's really powerful.
To that point, Emeka, a couple things. One, how that mirrors David, what David says, right? Against thee only have I sinned. How can I do this thing and sin against Yahuwah? And also, Proverbs 6:29 says, so is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her shall not be innocent. And how just this young man, you know, that, like you said, what we teach our teenagers, the realm of what's going on here is surrounds an 18 to 20-year-old man, young man, and how Yahuwah uses him in the height of his hormonal change. You know, an 18-year-old man, like everything is at the tip, everything is ready to go. You know, he's ready to express himself in every way. Yet he makes the decision. His decision was made prior to the situation even presenting itself. He knew the right way of Yahuwah, and he says, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against Elohim, Yahuwah? So great pull out, brother. Was there something else you wanted to say before I go on to Brother Gary?
Not at the moment. I'm looking over right now.
Okay. Brother Gary?
Like you said, this chapter is full of information. When I initially started reading, and I was really caught up in the first 3 verses just for a long time. And starting in verse 1, where it speaks about your seed had been taken down, and that phrase just, you know, I was caught in that phrase for a moment, and I had to look it up, and I think it's, I'm wrong, someone correct me, it's the word Yarad, Y-A-R-A-D, and it means to bring down. Mm-hmm. And I started approaching this chapter the same way. I was kind of really nitpicking stuff, you know, but it was helping me to understand more. And I went down into that same verse, and I looked at the name Potiphar. So I looked that up, and it means it means he whom, which is one of their deities, Ra, has given. But here he was being used by Yahuwah. He became a gift of Yahuwah to Yosef and his household. And so just so much came out of this. And that term in verse 2 where it says, and it came to be, which, if I'm not mistaken, again, I looked it up, and it's the word Hayah, H-A-Y-A-H, which is Strong's 1961. And it means to come pass or be or to become. And that term pops up in several verses in this chapter, you know, in 2 and 7 and 10 and so on. And it signifies that if I'm not mistaken, does it mean like a change is gonna come, or I don't know, brother. Maybe you can help me with that understanding of that, a deeper understanding of that.
I'm sorry, of what in verse 2, you said?
In verse 2, that phrase that says, and it came to be.
Yeah, that's the same phrase that he gave to Moshe when he was about to use them to deliver them out of Mizraim. And he asked, who are you, basically? And he said, Haya, Asher, Haya, which basically means the Yah who was, who is to be, become, so that Haya basically is to become, or you will be, or he was, it can, depending on which direction you're looking upon it, but that's basically what it means. Is that what you're right, basically what you're saying.
Okay, thank you.
Good stuff, brother.
Okay, that's all I have at this moment.
Brother Israel.
I want to point out two things. The first one is that in Genesis 39:1, where it says, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, right? Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down. Now I don't know if Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, now according to what I'm reading Hebrew, officer is saris, which means a eunuch.
Right.
So I don't know if Potiphar was saying Potiphar was a eunuch here, or was Joseph? See?
No, Joseph wasn't. Joseph had children. So you're absolutely right. An officer would have very often the highest guards around Pharaoh, his most trusted would have been eunuchs, because they were loyal, and they were not just loyal, they were made loyal. So there are certain things they couldn't violate because they were eunuchs. I was going to touch on this later because I was going to talk about the thirst of his wife. That may have been the reason.
That's the next thing I want to talk about.
There was nothing going on between her and her husband, so she, saw Joseph, and we'll touch on that later. But yes, that word officer is the same word for eunuch. Yeah,
that's what I want to talk about. Was like, so given this, now that I understand who it was, initially I thought it was Joseph when I first read it, and I read it again, and he brought it out. So yeah, that was her craving because her husband wasn't able to give her conjugal rights, so that's what it seems like. We don't know.
Right.
But like you said, if she went after Joseph, she wasn't the first time she did it. I'm sure it wasn't the first time she did it. She's that bold to go after Joseph. She done it before and got away with it. And so she figured, you know what? It's even better. He's inside my house. I ain't got to go, get no trouble without people knowing about it. And he'll give in because I'll just scare him with his, the inch of his life. He'll give in.
I don't know that, we don't know for certain, and other than what we have here, quite possible she could have done it before, but there was something specific about Joseph. His description given by Yahuah was that he was handsome. When Yahuah says you're handsome, that's set apart. He was beautiful to all eyes in every way. Physical stature, his heart, the way he carried himself, beauty starts from the inside. People fall in love with you because of who you are. Yes, there are physical attributes that are attractive, but he had it all. He had it inside, as we're seeing it happen. They pull out and the story unfold, but he was physically attractive as well. And the rotation of the language surrounding his wife was that she was burning for him. Like there was nothing that could turn that faucet off. It says day by day she went after him. She grabs hold of him. You know what I mean? So these words, you know, describe the type of force and temptation. Now, did Joseph had to resist? Remember, 18, 20 years old, brothers, remember how you were at 18, 20 years old. You know? I'll leave any descriptions alone. You can just use your imagination. But the point I'm trying to make is,
right now,
you know, Scripture tells us that Yahusha was given the same affirmities that we were, but was yet without sin. This is a picture of that. This is a picture of all of these things coming at this young man, but yet he was able to resist. You know.
Yeah, I still think within the context of this, you know, we don't have the exact wording that she done this before, but within the context of this, I wouldn't put it past that it has happened before, you know, and who's gonna believe who, you know? So the other point I was trying to make is that when we're, you know, this is, you know, what Yeshua said in the New Testament, but it goes back. He probably was quoting some scripture from the Old Testament when Yah puts you in charge of something small, he's testing you, okay? And since Joseph found favor with Yah, he was being tested because he had his favor. He had his favor, so basically he was representing Yah by being in Potiphar's house. So he was put in charge of that. It's not was just Potiphar that he was being tested by, but Yah was testing him too. You know, I made you a steward over something small. You know, I can trust you with bigger things. So this probably was a test for Joseph to see how faithful he was and where his heart was at. Even though Yah knew he does test us, you know, I think it was a test too that we can learn from.
Yeah. Matthew 25:21 says, and his Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. So absolutely, there's a picture of being a good steward and finding favor in this man as he exemplified faithfulness to Yahuwah. You know.
Yeah. I also think that he fulfilled Romans 13 to the T, you know, by being obedient to the being to the officials that Yah put over him, you know. So this is a proper. I think this is the more proper representation of Romans 13 than what we have nowadays.
Good stuff, brother JP, and then Brian, and then Gary again.
Because one last thing, because thing about it, he never against what Yah put there. He made it very clear. He made it very clear that he was gonna honor his master, and if he honored his master, he's honored his father, who was his main master, by doing the right thing in his earthly master's house. You know?
Absolutely, brother. Good principle. JP, then Brian, then Gary.
I was looking at that was a beautiful portion too, speaking about the eunuch, and man, that was very enlightening to me.
Yeah.
It really showed why the wife was so yearning for the man, you know what I mean? So I appreciate that. But I was looking, and I was really, you know, focusing now on verse 2. We see that Yahuwah was with Joseph. He was a prosperous man. And then we get to verse 3, and it made me, it says, and his master saw that Yahuwah was with him, and that Yahuwah made all that he had did to prosper in his hand. And it just I was thinking, because this is before the time of course, of Moshe and the Red Sea and all this, what we see there. So we can only look back from probably like here to Noah, you know what I mean, to really see. So, but for this man who's an Egyptian to see Yahuwah, you know, it just kind of gave me this understanding that they knew, like, yes, they had their own deities, but they knew, like, they seen the power. And it's like, I don't know, I see it even today, like, people can have all these deities, false deities, I'll call them, but they know there's only one source, you know what I mean, the true source and the true, you know, creator of the world and of the heavens. And so, but here I was seeing that, I was like, wow, like his master saw that Yahuwah was with him, you know, and that's what led him through this. Like we had read, you know, my first comment was towards that verse 9. I think it was verse 9. I don't know, I forgot, but just to see that, you know, Yahuwah was the master, realized and seeing that, and just kind of gives you this understanding that, I don't know, I guess I'm just trying to say that Yahuwah was seen by even these Egyptians, you know what I mean? And, you know, kind of reminds me of the Roman centurion, who, although he was a Roman centurion, he knew, he realized. So I want to bring that up.
Absolutely. And the verse you brought out before was verse 5, which this verse, you know, bleeds into. So it's all one thought here, of the man of Yah being an example, causing people to be attracted to it, causing people to understand what it is, causing people to see, you know, there's a reason why in economics they use principles out of Proverbs. You know, there's a reason why people who make fun of you and crack jokes about you behind your back, when a crisis hits, they come to you and say, brother, can you pray for me? Because they know who you serve, man. You know, so what an example that Joseph is here, for us to see, you know. Brother Brian and then Brother Gary.
Yeah, shalom, everyone. That was really interesting when y'all mentioned the eunuch thing, because I had no idea until today that was going on. What was going on with her, with Potiphar? Yeah, that brings a lot of insight, because I used to think that she's just being like a scandalous woman, and I was just like, it's kind of like, it's like sad, and like, it's like, it's kind of like, I almost feel sorry for her now, because it's like, that's like a situation that is like, that's not even fair to that culture at the time doing that stuff. And it's like I don't know, but anyway, I won't digress into that. But I was looking at Joseph. Just like when you're faithful to Yah in those tough situations, because he could have, like you were saying, with him being that age and stuff, and he could have felt sorry for himself and be like, well, Yah forsaken me. I'm in this situation. I'm a slave, and I'm just gonna make the best of it, or all that kind of stuff. But he remained faithful, and we'll see how Yah, like, I remind of the passage in Proverbs. In Proverbs 16:7, it says, "When a man's ways please Yah, he'll make even his enemies to be at peace with him." And how, when you remain faithful in no matter what situation you're in, Yah will work it for your good, turn it for your good at the end. And we will see in Joseph's life this proverb come alive in his life, time and time again. And it's just a testimony to me, like in my life and stuff. Just do good through storms and the sunshine. Don't be just a sunshine believer. You got being a sunshine believer. Is one thing, but then when the storm comes, you gotta be that same. You gotta be faithful, and like y'all was saying before, you're faithful. When you're faithful to a few things, y'all make you ruler over many things, and things. So that's it, and everything. But that's shoot. I was y'all was talking about that eunuch thing. I was just like, man, that's like an episode out of Young and the Restless, what Grandma used to watch. But I said she ain't had to watch that. All she had to do is read your scripture. She get the same amount of drama.
Absolutely, brother. You know, it's you know, as I look through this, you know, I'm looking at this passage, verse 2. It says, Yahuwah was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of the master, the Egyptian. And it reminded me of Acts chapter 7, when Stephen was preaching, and he says in verse 9, he says, and the patriarchs becoming envious sold Joseph into Egypt. But Elohim was with him and delivered him out of all his troubles and gave him favor and wisdom in the presence of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he made him governor over Egypt and all his house. You know, and it goes on to talk about the famine and how they became slaves. But everything goes back to Torah. This is our foundation. And this is where we have to find all of the things that we need for life. And as we look through the prophets, as we look through the writings, you know, as we look through, you know, the Gospels, as we look through the epistles, we will see clearly that everything that is written refers back to our foundation. You know, we look at verse 3. Let me pull this up right quick. Verse 3 says, and his master saw that Yahuwah was with him, and that Yahuwah made all that he did prosper in his hand. Made all that he did prosper, right? Psalms 1. Where did it come from? The Torah. And he, in his law, he meditates day and night. Verse 3, he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. You know, our word, the word that we depend on, the word that we seek for information, the word that we seek for instruction, you know, it amazes me how, you know, I looked at a lot of these chapters and verses to stand alone, separate from Torah, and to find their foundation always leads back to there. They're just the roots of everything that we believe and everything that we do. And hear how Joseph was the subject of the psalmist's letter, of the psalmist's song, right? Praise Yah. You know, I'm going to say some more, but I see a lot of hands. Sister Linda, then Sister June. Oh, no, Brother Gary was next. I'm sorry. Brother Gary, then Linda, then June.
Yeah, I heard a lot of brothers talking about eunuchs, and I'm going to offer this from Matthew chapter 19, verse 12. And it says, for there are eunuchs who were born from their mother's womb, which probably means a deformity of some type. Mm-hmm. And there are eunuchs who were made eunuchs by men, which is a reference to a surgical procedure.
Right.
And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the reign of the heavens. So Potiphar was probably what is called a rod saris, which means a chief eunuch, and he probably wasn't hindered in any way. You know, as a man, he probably, you know, had what was necessary to be a man to his wife, but with the position that he had and you know, the title that he had, it was probably a choice for the way he was living his life. because it's an understanding that men with titles like he had were for some reason expected to be eunuchs or to act as eunuchs for some reason. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, I think culturally, I think we also see it. One of my favorite. I love period films. I love films that mirror or are contemporary to biblical times, and you'll see that a lot. The stories mirror scripture. The hungry wife chasing the young servant. The most dependable men that surround the king, are unable to touch women. They're eunuchs. I mean, some stories have eunuchs. The best guards, the best fighters, they're all eunuchs. So that's interesting and worth looking into more. As we see, officer literally means eunuch. On whether or not those aspects were, I don't know where we would look for that, but sometimes we have to depend on historical, facts that tie into what Scripture's saying. So history will coincide with what Scripture is showing us in that realm. So thank you, brother. Sister Linda, then Sister June.
Yes, I believe my sister had her hand up before mine, but thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I don't got no problem picking June first.
39 and 9, as I was reading the scripture, it brought some things to my mind. There's none greater in this house, said Joseph, than I. Neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against Elohim? It began to remind me that when he said there's none greater than I, it reminds me of how Yah raises up his children, how he brings us through everything that was designed and placed in our path to kill us. He anoints us, he gives us power and authority, and he allows us to grow up in the stature, the maturity of his son. But he stipulates what we are not to do. In the garden, it was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. To the children of Yasharal, keep my commandments. Anointed person's cry should be, how can I do this wickedness? Instead of how easily we sometimes fall to the temptations around us. What Yosef had was precious to him, as what Yah entrusts us should be precious to us. And we should guard it as good stewards so that we do not sin against our Elohim. Praise Yah.
Praise Yah, sis. Praise Yah. June.
Hallelujah. Shabbat Shalom. Earlier, someone brought out verse 3 in chapter 39. And his master saw that Yahuah was with him, and that Yahuah made all he did to prosper in his hand. And it just reminded me, the woman just so happened to be studying Jacob and Laban, and it just reminded me of a very similar scripture in Genesis 30 Genesis chapter 30 verse 27, and it says, and Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, please stay, for I have diligently watched that Yahuah has blessed me for your sake. And so, yeah, it's just interesting that people take notice, like the world, they kind of know that we bring good to them, even in the workplace. I think sometimes, even when you have wicked employers, employers who aren't, following the ways of Yah, like I think even they recognize that certain employees who are following the way bring with them shalom as well as blessings and things like that. Like I think it's evident to people when Yah's hand is on your life, and so I just thought that was it just reminded me of that other scripture. That's all I wanted to share.
Absolutely, without question. I think JP and I were looking at that same thing earlier. But what you just said about the workplace. So hear me, people. A lot of times we're in situations that are very, very uncomfortable, specifically when it comes to work. I remember someone not too long ago, a prayer request of theirs was to remove them from the job that they were in. And I get that. I think that sometimes for sanity, for health reasons, sometimes maybe even if we're not mature enough, that is the right route to take. But I think that, the point that you brought out about us being the light in that situation, us being the only thing that remotely resembles Yahuah in that situation, is what's needed to bring a change in that company, in that office, toward the people that next, believer might be in your job, in your office. And by you removing yourself or being asked to be removed, you circumvent what Yahuah wants to do, and I think that sometimes we have to be sensitive to say that even when we're doing the right thing, like Joseph is doing the right thing, he does the right thing in resisting. We're going to continue to read, like he ends up in prison, doing the right thing. And it doesn't always mean that just because you're in a bad situation or what seemingly looks grim or gloomy, that it's a bad thing. Or that something we did got us there. Sometimes when we're doing the right thing, Yahuah will have us in those situations. And I think not only do we have to be sensitive to know it, we have to be prepared to deal with it, because it is a part of each and every one of us. It's a part of our walk with him.
Yeah, and we have to really listen to Yah's voice, because he'll, back to the study we had on Laban and Jacob, Yah told Jacob when it was time for him and his family to get up and leave and go, because he saw Laban had animosity towards him, and Yahuah actually told him to return back to his land where he should go. And so I completely agree with you, and I think we have to be sensitive to what the Ruach is saying, what Yah is saying in terms of timing. Should we stay and endure, or should we go? Really being guided by his voice. Proverbs says that if we acknowledge him in all our ways, he will direct our path. And so I think it's in those workplace situations, and in every situation, we have to strive to acknowledge Yah in all our ways, and that stay versus go could be different for different people in different situations and different timings, but just to be tuned in to what the Ruach is leading us.
For sure. Very good. Brother JP.
Just a final thought for myself in this section. It was I was just thinking about, like, I wonder what the people were thinking around him. You know what I mean? Like, he buys this, it says he bought him out of the hands of the Ishmaelites that are coming through Egypt, and now he sets this Hebrew into this high place. You know what I mean? Over his whole land. Yeah, I wonder what the people were, you know what I mean, talking, and just this. And I know it's just coming from my own mind of, like, wow, like I'm just wondering, like, wow, this is some interesting stuff. You got this Egyptian man who's a high, he's sitting in a high place himself already. Then he gets a Hebrew man that he buys, who out of slavery, and then he he sees that Yahuwah is with him, so he recognizes, and then he places him up in this high seat and says, I'm not even, all I'm going to worry about is what I'm going to eat. I just worry about what my bread, he says in that verse, you know. He said, where did he say that? Let me see. Let me get that real quick, because he says, man, I can't even find it. Can't find it. Oh, right there in verse 6. He says, and he left all that he had in Joseph's hand and knew not aught he had except or save the bread which he did eat. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, so much, everything was given into Joseph's hand. And so just what the people thought around him, I just thought that was just something I was thinking about as we were talking. And like, man, it's just, it's amazing. It's amazing what Yahuwah does. He places people in positions, and it's just, I don't know, it's just unfathomable to think about sometimes, you know. So just want to bring that out.
Yeah, no, I don't think that thought came out of nowhere, you know, just wondering what the people were thinking, because Potiphar's wife taps into what the people might have been thinking when she addresses them, because he was a Hebrew. The rest of the slaves were Egyptian, and there had to be something about the way they felt, about the way he was, and it pans out in how she uses them as witnesses, and we'll see that later. Good point. Good point. Brother Israel, and then Mecca.
I want to bring out verses 20, verses 20 through 23 when he became a
We
prisoner.
didn't get there yet. We're in verses 1 through 10, brother.
So my connection dropped on me, and I had to log back in.
Okay, yeah,
sorry,
let's
go ahead.
yeah, we'll get to there. Save that.
I try to remember it.
Write it down. Brother Mecca.
Whoops. Okay. Yeah, you know, I was just thinking about, because JP brought out earlier, you know, how like they would have had a knowledge of Yahuwah. You know, just how they looked at him and said, you know, he saw that, you know, Yahuwah was blessing, you know, was with him. And, you know, it took me back, you know, just going back to Abraham, you know, when Abraham went into Mitzrayim, you know, and how, you know, the whole issue with Sarah and Abraham telling, you know, them that it was a sister, and, you know, Abimelech getting the dream and all that. And it's just like even from Abraham, the Egyptians had a knowledge of who Yahuwah was and his people. So they knew, well, this is a Hebrew coming in, you know, and probably were like, yo, this, and there was probably, you know, we've talked about, you know, the signet, looking at the signet with Yehuda, there was probably some, you know, if not a family signet, there was probably something about him that resembled, and they were probably like, yo, he's probably, you know, he obviously is one of their people, you know, and they were probably, you know, at least those that had any kind of knowledge of Father Abraham and the things that happened were probably like, we need to be careful with this and just scope it out. You know, let's scope out the scene real quick with this Joseph character, you know, and let's see how things play out. And after that, they probably seen him, you know, committing himself to the lifestyle, you know, of praying and seeking Yahuwah, you know, and they were probably like, whoa, yeah, nah, so you see that? Nah, Yahuwah's with them. Like, nah, that same Yahuwah that, remember Abimelech was talking about that Yahuwah that came and closed all the wombs? That looked like the same Yahuwah that's with that man. Yeah, hey, let's put him over everything. That way, you know, Yahuwah will be with us as he with him, you know. So, you know, I would think that they had some knowledge, because it does. I know it's not too far of a timeline between Abraham and Joseph, you know, and you know, at least you know, the fact that there could be some remnant of Abraham's, you know, the historical events that happened with Abraham still resonating with the people. So I definitely think that may have been one of the reasons why they kind of were like, yo, let's examine this first and see how it was, and they may notice, oh wow, you know, yeah, Yahuwah's with him. All right, let's be cool, y'all, and let's see what Yahuwah's gonna do through him. You know.
Well, I mean, I can see how that idea or that thought might be a prevalent one. And I'm not correcting you, brother. I'm just saying that in this particular chapter, I don't see anything that necessarily says that Joseph was speaking of Yahuwah. Well, again, in verse 3, it does say, and his master saw that Yahuwah was with him, and that Yahuwah made all that he did prosper. So to your point, I would say more than likely Potiphar had some type of understanding of who Yahuwah was. So I'm going to take back what I was going to say, because that verse kind of shows that Potiphar had some knowledge. So I would stand by what you just said. So good point, brother. But I wanted to pause here for a second. I wanted to read something, and then I want to talk about Joseph with you guys for a minute. This is out of the book of James, chapter 1. I'm reading from verse 12. It says, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been proved or approved, he will receive the crown of life which Yahuwah has promised to those that love him. Let no one say that he is tempted. I am tempted of Elohim. For Elohim cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires." Let me say that again. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. So here we see James talking about temptation, talking about where it comes from, and then talking about sin. So each thing that he says is a birthing of something. One thing leads to another. We see that in Psalms 1. But here in chapter 39 of Genesis, verse 7, it says, "And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, 'Lie with me.'" Verse 8, "But he refused and said to his master's wife, 'Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand.' Verse 9, 'There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife.' And then again, 'How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against Elohim?'" So here we see this young man, and I believe that there's something that Yah is showing us here in the realm of temptation, in the realm of sin, because, when we look at temptation, one of the things we have to understand is that we're tempted by those things that we desire. If it wasn't a desire, it wouldn't be a temptation. This particular instance, Potiphar's wife had to be beautiful in order for him to be tempted. But his decision, like we said earlier, was made prior to, and I bring this up because we have to decide in our minds and hearts when it comes to sin, where we are going to stand when it comes to Yahuwah and obeying him. Because, as we are tempted by things, we have to decide that we're simply not going to do it. If you can't play with it, and here's the reason why, because we joke about it, especially when it comes to sexual sin. You know, guys, men here, you know, you've joked about it, man. You know, that's a temptation. You know, we joke about the, you know, we even joke about our failures at times. You know, ladies too. You know, I hear you. Yeah, I know. Father knows best, but I needed some. You know, so these things happen. You know, but we have to decide that that's not an option. That we can't succumb. It says that he refused. It says that he took a stand and decided this is not something I'm going to do. My behavior is not going to follow the ways of my heart in the realm of being connected to the flesh. It's not. If I struggle with drinking, I'm not going to the bar. I'm not going to hang around my family members to get together and drink all the time because I might take a sip. If I struggle with pornography, I'm not going on the internet. I'm not getting on that website. I'm gonna put protection around me. You know, if I'm struggling with a particular person, I'm not gonna go around that person by myself. I'm not gonna get on the telephone with that person in the late hours at night because I'm feeding my mind with something that I want. You know, and we joke, you know, sometimes, but we can't wear our failures as a badge, specifically when it comes to these types of issues, these types of vices, because they're vital to our health. You know, the reason I read the James passage was because each one was a graduation and it leads to death. You know, if, you know, Psalms 1, if we look at it, if you first, you know, walk with the counsel of the ungodly, eventually you're then gonna stand with the counsel of the ungodly. So you're not moving, now you're standing. And then you're gonna sit with the counsel of the ungodly. Now you in the same pool, you swimming in the same water, you eating the same food, you're drinking the same drinks, you're being influenced by the same things that influence them. Death is the next step. But blessed is the man that is like a tree that sits and digs himself and plants roots in the water, because he will be continually nourished. And everything that he does in his life will prosper, as we see with Joseph. So, you know, when it comes to our temptations, when it comes to our sin, we have to make the decision ahead of time, because it's going to come. By all manner of the flesh shall we be tempted. You know, it says in what, I can't think of where it is in scripture. It says, you know, through much temptation shall we enter into the kingdom of Yahuah. We don't have to add to that by not doing the things that we're supposed to do. Making this decision ahead of time. This part is going to lead to failure. You know, and I just think that as individuals, we have to tie into that. We have to see that that's what Yahuwah is saying to us here in the life of Joseph. Joseph refused. And it even gets stronger as we read on, the temptation that besets him. You know, how many of us would fall for this? You know, something perfectly dressed the way you like it. Will you fall for it? You know, men and women. So let's definitely heed. I just wanted to pause and just really drive in the fact that sometimes we play and we joke around with sin, and sin is death. And yes, there are times where we're light-tongued and we have fun and we, you know, we enter in or usher in a conversation. But when it comes to disobeying the Father, we got to be serious about not doing that in every way and have a short account of when we do. So praise God. I just wanted to share that, and we can move forward. Brother Brian, and then we'll pick up in verse 11.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about, like, I think sometimes we may overlook this in Genesis, but you see, like, time and time again how the awareness of Yah's law, His Torah, and how Abraham lived. You go way back to even Cain and Abel on through, how these Noah and Abraham and all that, they the awareness of Yah's Torah, even though they didn't have, to my knowledge, they didn't have like it wasn't like written down, as far as like, it may not have been written down in book form, like for like what Moshe did, but it's interesting to see like this observance and awareness of Yah's, what Yah expected out of them, and how they lived their lives like that. And what happened, like it seemed like when they became slaves in Mitzrayim, I guess it seems like they got assimilated in that culture. It kind of saturated that pagan culture saturated them so much that when they came out, like y'all had to like really start from the like ground zero with them and stuff, even to the point where he almost had to potty train them in the desert. It's like, yeah, don't leave your excrement out, dig a hole and bury it. So it's like it's interesting to me to see that decline from like people like Abraham and Jacob and Joseph here, and then when they're slaves in Egypt, it's just like, I don't know, there's just like a decline that happens where that y'all's like gotta start from ground zero. I just find that interesting. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Brian. I think as we go through, matter of fact, there's a couple things. There's a couple cross references in the next several verses that we're about to read. They go directly to Exodus. So great point, because that ushers us right in to what we're about to speak on. Sister Diane, and then I think Brother Nate had his hand raised to read next, and we'll move forward. Go ahead, sis.
Mute. I just wanted to say thank you. That was very edifying about Psalms 1, which is one of my favorite Psalms. I try to say it every day, and a lot of times when I'm talking with others or evangelizing or whatever, I use that. But I had never taken it from the perspective of like, this is what will happen if I walk, with these people, or if I stand in the way of the ungodly, or this is what happened when I will sit, in the presence of the ungodly. This is a progression of slippage. It's a progression of sin. When we do these things, it's one thing to talk about not doing them. Don't walk, don't stand, don't sit. But I never think about taking it as the consequences, of what happens when we do this. So that was very edifying. I just want to thank you for bringing that out, because this is one of my favorite scriptures.
Absolutely. Praise God. That's one of my favorites too. And one day I'll really open that, when I get an opportunity, I'll open that passage up, because there's a whole lot more there. Because he not only does he tell us not what to do, because people mistake that there's a bunch of do's and don'ts, but he tells us what to do, to prevent us from even following that path, to keep our mind off that path. Somebody brought out, I think it was Keturah in the morning study, about the battle with our mind, and what we put in our mind matters. What we're reading, what we're watching on television, because sometimes I like some stuff that, I'll indulge in, one of my favorite, shows, on TV was about a good guy who was actually a killer, so, I liked it for the writing and the story, but, is that edifying me? Do I have to, stop doing that, stop watching that, of course, it's not making me want to go out and do anything to anybody, but, it's still something that I'm feeding myself with, so I got to be careful of stuff like that. And I think we all do. So, couple hands, Brother Don, and then Brother Nate wanted to read the next time. So, Brother Don, go ahead, and then Nate, you can go ahead and read verse 11.
I'm glad you let me in before he started reading again. As you were saying about the temptation, we have those temptations that comes, and you mentioned earlier, what are we doing about the situations that we are being taught to come set apart from? And the book of James, when you was reading the book of James from chapter 1, it really enlightens you on this chapter that we're talking about right now, because the things that James are talking about, it leads to death if we're not obedient to the walk in the way that Yah is telling us to be set apart from. We don't have to go through we go through the temptations, but we don't have to yield to them. And when you said that, it says, what are we doing about this? We are given the power to resist it, but are we using that power to resist? Uh, are we using the things that be set apart from the things that causes us to sin? Or there's certain things that the world do, we got to come out of and not do them. That's why we are set apart. Those temptations is there to draw us back to them, but we have to think and know that putting Yah first and the power that He's given us, the authority He's given us to overcome these things, we have that power to do so. So just start using them and helping one another to come to that point of, hey, we have to get those things up. We must get those things up, because Hashatan is set before us to do so. He's trying to weaken us. But like you said, brother, read James. And it really comes back to articulating with this particular chapter that we're talking about. And I just wanted to say that and be encouraged to everybody. Let's start using the power that Abba Yah given us to resist these things and temptations that come before it. Although we know they're coming there, but we have the power and authority to resist it, and they will flee from us. Praise Yah.
Praise Yah, brother. Absolutely. James said, when you are tempted, meaning that it's definitely going to happen, without question. Brother Nate, you still want to read verses 11 to the end?
Yes, of course. I was going to highlight what you said, that was really powerful words about don't put yourself in that situation. That's really powerful to do. If you're weak in a situation, like it reminded me, I was just counseling a classmate, and he's kind of going through some depression, and been kind of having some depression over a few things. And then he just was telling me about some girl that he liked, back home. He's from China, and I guess she went drinking, and a guy took advantage of her when she was drinking, and so he was like really mad and upset about it. And then he just told me just the other day that she's back drinking with the guy again. And I'm like, how are you sitting there and you're complaining about a situation like that, and then you're putting yourself right back in that same situation, to where, I mean, she went to like, she checked herself into like a mental hospital for a while, and so she was seriously having some issues, and then she puts herself right back in that same situation. And it just, I had counseled him and told him, that you gotta let her know that you gotta stop that, you gotta get away from that. And so kind of highlighted what you said. If you're weak in this category or that category, you're weak with food, don't go to a buffet. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? If you're seriously having health problems, you know what I mean? You need to stay away from this, or stay away from that, or don't go near this, until you feel that it doesn't affect you anymore, to where it's not a temptation. It's not a temptation unless you feel drawn to it. So that's really powerful words. I kind of want to just highlight what you said. That was good. But verse 11 to the end of the chapter, 39. And it came to be on a certain day, when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand, and fled and ran outside. And it came to be, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the man of her house and spoke to them, saying, "See, he has brought into us a Hebrew to mock us. He came into me to lie with me." And I cried out with a loud voice. And it came to be, when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. And she kept his garment with her until his master came home. And she spoke to him these same words, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to me to mock me. So it came to be, as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. And it came to be, when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me according to these words, that his displeasure burned. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the sovereign's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. But Yahuah was with Joseph in extending loving commitment to him, and he gave him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And the prison warden gave into the hand of Joseph all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there was his doing. The prison warden did not look into any point that was under Joseph's hand, because Yahuah was with him, and whatever he did, Yahuah made it prosper. So, kind of what I see, and I might. It's just at least, at the very least, this story. I've looked at this chapter before. And sometimes you're caught unawares on situations. So I'm gonna give Joseph the benefit of the doubt on that. But look what happened, when he went into the house without another person, when he went in, a home, of another woman, someone who's maybe not, trustworthy, maybe, not under the same commandments and the same ruach, someone that doesn't care about bearing false witness or other commandments, that she breaks. So it's definitely, I've seen this as a lesson learned from Joseph, not to put myself in a situation to where something like this could even be said in the first place. So I definitely learned from that mistake, or would like to think that I've learned from that, and try to avoid situations, not necessarily that situation would ever happen, but it's not usually a good situation to put yourself there, especially if there was a temptation that would be there. If, like, as you said, it made sense. I've never really thought of that Potiphar's wife, would be tempting, and then to put himself in a situation where it's just him and her alone, you could be, asking for trouble, because, what if you didn't run? Then it would have been even worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it doesn't say whether or not she had hand in making sure nobody else was there. But you're absolutely right. If you are in the house and the situation, because, remember verse 10, it says, so it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed to her. So this was something that was happening on a daily basis. And, him going into the house to do the work brings to mind what we just talked about, not putting yourself in that situation alone. Because we don't know whether she made it so that no one else was there, but no one else was there. So no one else was able to witness what was going on. But it doesn't sound like she would have done it. It sounded like she would have done this whether the house was full of people or not. She was after him day after day, so, but yeah, we surely have to make sure that we have accountability when in a situation of weakness or temptation, or knowing that a situation will present itself, heading it off at the pass, and that goes for telephone conversations too. Sometimes we can, I'm sure there are single men, single women, and surely you're free to see who Yah has for you, and you have to get to know a person. But when you're in the realm of someone that is ungodly, or you're in the realm of someone that is tempting and will lead you to a course of sin, protect yourself. Don't speak with that person alone. Don't talk to that person after 6 o'clock at night. What are you on the phone at midnight for, talking with the opposite sex if you're not married to that person? You know, it will lead you to a place where you don't want to be. So trust me, I've been in that situation. I've been there. I've been, you know, single and desiring. And, you know, if you don't have a woman that thinks like Yah, that has, you know, devoted herself to Yah, using troubles. I'm telling you right now, women likewise. So, you know, be careful and protect yourself, have accountability in situations like that. What else do we see? Did you have more, Nate, or were you done?
Takes me a minute to unmute. Yeah, I'm done for now. I'll look kind of over, maybe, and put my hand up later.
Cool. So we see quite a bit going on here. All the men are gone. JP, what you brought out earlier, she shamed her husband. She also used the word Hebrew kind of in a, speaking of them lesser, some people look at this passage and say it's kind of a racial term, the way she used it. Using it amongst other Egyptians, it would have made it stand out. If you look at Genesis, where is it? Genesis 43, verse 32, it says, so they set him a place by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. So, you know, when she rises up that name Hebrew, she's speaking something derogatory about him to the other Egyptians that were around. So, JP, to your point earlier about how they felt about him, you know, there was probably a specific way they looked at him. There may have been jealousy there on how he was placed up on top. Who is this Hebrew? Potiphar's wife uses that fact to help drive her point home as she slanders him. And to Brian, to your point, this lines up with Exodus 23:1. You shall not circulate a false report. So, you know, we see how, you know, she's violating Torah, and there is a glimpse of Torah here in Genesis, even before the law is given, to the point Brian was talking about earlier. JP and then Israel.
Just to speak on the on verse 10, you know, like you're talking about temptation during that between time of the portions, and you see in verse 10, she spoke to him day by day. You know what I mean? Like, you know, it doesn't give us an account of how many days that was, you know, but you can only imagine, you know, just day by day that he hearkened, he didn't listen unto her, to lie by her, to be with her. And so it was like she was waiting, you know, she was like a snake, man, you know what I'm saying? Like she was like a snake, because the next verse it says, and it came to pass about this time that Joseph went in the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him. And then that, like, she waited. It was like a day by day, premeditated. So it was just as, you know, and again, you know, kind of going back to temptation and speaking about that, like being always on our toes, just not taking your guard down and saying, oh, you know what, I can, like you said, can I slack off right now? Because I'm strong, you know, like I've been walking in this walk. Nah, day by day, the enemy is out there lurking and waiting for us to slack off, because it also takes that one time, you know what I mean, to fall back, and you're like, oh, then you're, you know, you're repentant, and And that conviction is hurt. The conviction hurts when you do fall into temptation or some type of temptation. It hurts because when you're walking with Yahuwah, that conviction is powerful. So just wanted to share that, brother.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think also too, you brought out an interesting point, how we always have to be on our toes because we come to, situations where we have victories over that temptation. That's actually the weakest point. Remember, Yahusha went and he conquered 40 days, 40 nights. At the close of his conquering, who shows up? Hasatan to tempt him, after our victories are our weakest points because we think, we've done something, not realizing there's always Yahuwah, that it's always the Ruach in us that guides us and leads us and makes decisions if we heed to it. And we have to continually heed to it. Day by day means he had to day by day say no. He had to day by day. And here's another thing. Some sin you got to run from. You know what I mean? Literally. You literally have to run from and leave everything behind. Like he left his clothes in her hand. He ran. He didn't stick around and say, I'm strong. I can do this. I think I can. I know I can. I know I'm the engine that could. Nah, he ran. He ran. And we have to recognize those times that we have to break camp, literally. Because we used to say that break camp means you're running. You're running. He broke camp. You know what I mean? He's running. This is true in our lives, and we got to pay attention to it. Get away from it. Get away from that guy. Get away from that girl. Get away from those people. Get away from that situation like the plague. Run from it like the plague. Like the plague that will get into your body and kill you. So, praise Yah. What else we see there? Brother Israel.
Share was on the tail of what JP said, but I got ahead of myself not too long ago. Getting back to, I'm going to start with, bring my Bible up here. I'm going to start with verse 20. There we go, sorry. And Joseph master took him and put him into the prison where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. What I want to say was, is that you go back when she was hollering, she meaning Potiphar's wife was hollering that Joseph had done something. A couple things here that Ruach brought to my mind was at the beginning of this, it said that he found favor. Remember? He found favor, and Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, he found favor with Pharaoh and Potiphar. Okay. So what I'm saying is that they didn't want to lose face. Even though his wife had made that accusation, apparently he didn't believe all of it, because if he did, look at the prison that Joseph was put in. He was put into the king's prison, and they didn't want to lose face about, we bought this Hebrew from the Midianites and now the Ishmaelites, and now look what he's done. So apparently there was something that they didn't want to lose favor on, because face on, because they had brought it. He had trusted him enough to bring him into the house, and then on top of that, he's being accused of something, and the scripture scripture doesn't say that that he thought, Potiphar thought about it and he made a consideration, but something is there in the context of this where Potiphar said to himself, something's not right here, and he wasn't really sure his wife was 100% right. Plus, they didn't want to lose face. So notice what prison he goes into. He goes into the king's prison, not just some ordinary prison, even though he is a Hebrew.
Yeah, one of the
because it said in verse 4, he found favor in his sight and attended him and made him overseer of his house. So, and then verse 5 said, I'm sorry. trying to find a verse where it says he found that the Lord was, verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of the Egyptian. His master saw that Yah was with him and that Yah caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So that man seen all that. He knows something ain't right here.
Well, I think you definitely bring out something interesting, because in verse 1, it says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian. So the captain of the guard may and very well in this case would have been in charge of not only prison sentences but also execution. To lie with someone's wife would have brought an execution, normally a beheading. So there is something to say about the lack of punishment and where he was put in prison. It very well may have been that he didn't believe what his wife's report was, but he had to do something based upon the witness that was given against Joseph at the time. So I would definitely say there's something to look at there, and quite possibly, that could be an accurate assessment of what we see happen as Potiphar takes action for what was accused of Joseph at the time, because he should have had his head cut off.
Yeah, and also on top of that, even when he got into prison, the prison guard gave him favor. He saw favorable things about him. So Yah just kept blessing him, even though he was in a position he didn't want to be in. He was still getting blessed by Yah, because something about Joseph, if people can see these good traits in him through Yah, then there's something there about him that I'm sure Potiphar recognized it hadn't changed, and he's probably questioning it. And then when he made favor with the guards there. So I mean, something's there. Something is there.
Yeah, I mean, I think his adherence to the laws of Yah and his ways were what made him stand out.
And on top of that, he's not. If he was doing what, we know he didn't do it, but if he was doing what Potiphar's wife was accusing him of, think about the situation he keep being put in, being committed to, and the favor keeps showing. So I think part of the story here is by trusting in Yah, his glory will shine no matter what situation you're in. We don't see it that way sometimes, when we deal with situations. But after, we sit back and we armchair quarterback things, we can see things. Not all the time. Sometimes we see them right up front, but in this case, I'm sure Joseph was saying, you know what? I'm in a bad position, but I'm still getting favor, and I'm going to keep my faith in Yah. And I think he's passing his test.
Yeah, and that speaks to what I was talking about earlier. Like, sometimes we think that we're in a bad situation when we do wrong things. Sometimes we're in a bad situation because we've done right things. The world is contrary to our way of thinking. The world is contrary to our actions. Therefore, we're put in a stronghold because of them. And as always, we have to depend on Yah to deliver us. Brother Nate?
Yeah, I was just going to point out in chapter verse 19, and it came to be when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, "Your servant did according to me these words," that his displeasure burned. I was just going to kind of point out that it does look like he was in wrath, that his displeasure burned. So he put him in prison. I'd have to do more research on that, but that's a good point that you bring up about that he was put in the king's prison, where the king's prisoners were. Would the king's prisoners be given more favor, or would the king's prisoners be given less favor? Would it be a stricter? Would that be like a federal penitentiary, or would that be like a county lockup? I would assume that the king's the king, where the king's prisoners were confined, would maybe be more of like a federal penitentiary. It could be on a stricter, maybe harsher area. Definitely under better funding at the very least. I would assume. But to me, the one that stuck out to me was that his displeasure burned. So it looked like he was in the King James. It says that his wrath was kindled. And so it looks like he put him in prison in the heat of emotions. Potiphar did. Looks like Joseph was put in prison when Potiphar was emotional under the spirit of jealousy. And I don't know if anyone's ever experienced the spirit of jealousy. When your wrath is kindled, you're not necessarily the most forgiving, or you don't really, you kind of see in red a little bit, you know what I mean? But it does state something, and I never put that up, that he wasn't beheaded. So that was so there could have been you would assume that he would, he'd go on the chopping block after a while, which didn't happen. So that would show that at the very least Yahuah was with him. So I just kind of maybe wanted to point that out.
Well, yeah, I mean, you bring up an interesting point, but I think he put him into the royal prison, the king's prison. And wasn't that the one that Potiphar commanded?
Can I add something to that, brother?
Yeah, officer, captain of the guard, an Egyptian. I think that he put him in the prison that he commanded. So I'm not sure, where that fits in, but
I can add something to that if you like.
Yeah. Go ahead, real quick, and then Jadiel hand raised too.
In the Hebrew, the word is bayith, which means a house. It's a house. It's like a court or like a palace type place. Okay, it's not like a regular dungeon type prison. So he was put into a place. The word, they use the word prison in English, but it's bayith in Hebrew, meaning a house, or a place like a palace or something, or a court. So it wasn't a place of torment, or a place of where the settings were not comfortable or pleasing. He was just put in a place where they keep an eye on him. But I'm sure according to this, he had all the amenities he needed, better than a regular prison that we think about in the Western mindset, according to the Hebrew scriptures.
Good point. Brother Jai, then June, then Unique. Jadiel, you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking, interesting. The king's prison, just from looking at a future instance of what occurs in the king's prison, is there's usually an investigation. There's usually an investigation to see what's going on, whether or not certain things was true or not. I'm just looking at the instance in which later on we see the cupbearer and the baker put in the same prison, waiting to see waiting until the investigation is over, and then there's actually a death penalty. So I think that may be the difference of the emphasis of this particular type of prison.
Yeah.
It's not like a prison of somebody that owes a debt. It was a king's prison, and it was an offense of like an attempted rape, so to speak, of one of the Pharaoh's officers' wives. So this wouldn't be like some regular prison where you're just there for the rest of your life. This would be a prison in which you're waiting to get your head cut off or something like that.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I'm jumping to the next chapter, verse 40, chapter 40, verse 3 says, so he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them and served them, so they were in custody. And when you look house up, it refers to the two holding areas for the prison. One was a regular proper prison. The other was a type of house arrest associated, but not prison itself. So that's where Joseph was. He was literally on house arrest. So that would tie into what Jadiel was just saying. June, then Unique.
I just had like a wonderment, if you will. Earlier you or someone brought out that Potiphar possibly didn't believe his wife's report. You know, like in other words, like he knew that she was lying, basically. And I was thinking again about verse 2, which says that and that you know Yahuah was with Joseph and he became a prosperous man. And then verse 3, you know, everything he touched prospered. And you know, and I was thinking about his character when he was a child, you know, and how he, you know, interacted with his father and his brothers, and he had a righteous character. And so I was wondering, in addition to that prosperity, because people could see that everything he touched prospered, but I wonder if he also had like a righteous reputation, you know, like you know, his integrity could be why his master entrusted him with so much. And you know, in other words, people saw that he was an upright dude. And so it was all the more perhaps unbelievable, the report that he heard from the wife, particularly if the master knew how his wife was versus and knew how Joseph was. So it was just a wonderment I had, if he had that kind of reputation in the land for being an upright man of Yah, in addition to a prosperous one.
Well, he definitely had that reputation within Potiphar's house. Potiphar definitely looked at him that way. I think what you heard Brother Israel bring out was that it's possible that he didn't believe his wife. We don't know that for certain, but the actions, if the actions are true with what, you know, Jadiel just pointed out, and that he was put on house arrest versus put in the general population, you know, call it Gen Pop. If he wasn't put in Gen Pop but put in a special place, a house arrest, there was some favor there that didn't break through the false report that Potiphar's wife brought forth. So it's very possible that that did happen, but we don't know that for certain. But we can look at that, you know, based upon the construct that it's in and the things that happen around it, and whether Potiphar would have acted or whether there would have been a trial first or he would have been executed. So all of those things could be considered, but we don't have actually what happened. But I think that's a running theory. You know, if you look at some commentaries, you'll see that idea brought forth as well. So it is an idea that's connected to this particular passage. But in Potiphar's house, he was seen as upright, and so much so that they wanted him around so that they can also prosper as well. Yonique?
This made me think of Jeremiah. When Jeremiah went to King Zedekiah to prophesy that Babylon was going to come and take them, and his other priests and kings around him, they put Jeremiah in the dungeon in the city. And an Ethiopian came to the king and said, no, bring him into the courts, the king's prison, because in the king's prison, it's more favorable that he is going to stay alive. And he'll have food to eat and all of these other things. And then even further it goes on that Ethiopian, when Jeremiah was released, Yah said, go to the Ethiopian, tell him that because you did that, you will be blessed. So it just made me think of Jeremiah.
Oh no, thank you. That's a great connection to give us a clearer picture of what may be going on here. Praise God. Thank you, Sister
I
Diane.
retract of the king's prison. I accept Unique's synopsis.
Thank you, brother. Sister Diane.
Yes, as I was listening to everyone, trying to tie all of this in to the possibility of Potiphar being a eunuch and why Joseph received all the favoritism and why he was in the house prison. You know, it could be like a very human situation, to whereas Potiphar knew his situation. He knew his condition. He also understood his wife's situation and her condition. And not only that, but he also understood Joseph's situation. He knew that Joseph was favorite of Yah. He knew that Joseph was bringing favoritism into bringing blessings and prosperity into the household. He knew and understood the condition of his wife. If he were indeed a eunuch, he knew and understood the condition of his wife. He knew that his wife was going to suffer the way she was suffering because, you know, human nature just tell us that whether he was eunuch or not. He also knew that he didn't have much power in it, and he had a lot of respect, obviously, for Joseph, that Joseph remained faithful to him. You know, he remained faithful as the servant of the ruler of the house, even though whether he was a eunuch by choice or by attitude or character or surgery or whatever, nevertheless, he was one as service to the king. And here is this young man in the prime of his life, as you mentioned, that by all natural means, for the length of time that he was being coerced by his wife, and he did not succumb to it, that gave Joseph even more favoritism, which is what we're told that he's receiving favoritism anyway. So Potiphar really has some things to, you know, as they say, save face or whatever. He didn't want to throw Joseph into a dungeon because he knew his value. He didn't want to, but he also had to respect and honor his wife, and he also had to maintain his status in his household. So these are just other things that could be looked at as to why it turned out the way he did, that Joseph went to house arrest rather than being placed in a dungeon.
Yeah, I definitely think all of those things have to be considered, you know, when we look at this. And one thing we didn't bring out, we didn't touch on as much, is what his wife did. His wife basically publicly shamed him for bringing this Hebrew here, you know, to shame them. So she brought out, you know, her husband's wrong. So she kind of, you know, with the story coupled with the way she disrespected him in front of many, pushed him in a direction. And that could have aided to his anger as well, versus what Joseph actually did. You know what I mean? So we have to keep that in mind as well. But good point, sis. Brother Nate, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I was looking at that word when you put it up in Genesis 40 verse 3. Yeah, that word prison. It's interesting that the Strong's, it depends on where you're at. You know, it'll use baith, you know, which can be house, and then that he uses the word sohar, H5470. It doesn't look like it's necessarily a dungeon. All that it means is just like surrounded by walls. The word sohar. And where is it at here? Yeah, they believe it maybe means it comes from the word roundness, possibly. So it's just basically, that you're confined to a place, surrounded by walls. But that word is only used 8 times, and it's only in chapters 39 and chapters 40 of Genesis is the only time that we see it. So if they wanted to use dungeon, then they probably would have used, the word that Yirmiyahu was confined to.
Yeah, with the whole understanding that word is house, and then with what Unique brought out in Jeremiah, the King's Court, I think that I would agree that it was a special place versus a dungeon or the common prison as we saw earlier. So, good point, brother. But we're reaching our time, so we have time for maybe one more comment, if anyone wants to make one. All right. Oh, JP, there you go. You just made it, brother.
I just want to point out. I mean, I know we all been talking about it, but just that Joseph, how he had found that favor with Potiphar, and then he gets locked up in prison. You know what I mean? Whatever, and then he gets this favor in prison. It's like, I think about somebody with power who goes into a prison system in our modern times. They also get that same kind of favor, within the prison system of our time. Of course, they're not having the hand of Yahuah over them, but they're getting this fear, you know what I mean? So, of man. And so, I almost kind of get that same like revelation here, and within my personal mind is that I'm seeing that the man that was in control of the prison system, maybe he also had because how we had read about Potiphar in the beginning of the chapter, just having that it says that, and in verse 3, and his master saw that Yahuah was with him, and so I'm kind of looking at that like maybe that the same thing with the master. It says here in verse 22, and the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph hand all the prisoners. So it was like the same kind of a scenario that maybe I don't know, because I'm just reading into it, you know what I'm saying, within my own mind, and saying, hey, that prisoner, the keeper of the prison, he might have had that same understanding, you know what I mean? Just like seeing Joseph and so he committed all the prisoners into Joseph's hand, and it's just like a similar thing. So I just want to bring that out. Just again, it's a personal mind thing, and so I just want to share that what I was thinking.
Yeah, I see why you would say that. I mean, I definitely think there's a strong contrast there, though, because here it's the hand of Yahuah that gives the favor. Normally, in a situation where a powerful person goes into prison and has favor, it's tied to their wallet, their bank account, because they can pay off those people and they'll do the things that they need to get done. That's not Yahuah. So that will be the only difference or the contrast between the two. But yeah, but the point remains that favor, is seen and protects that person from the norms that would happen to a prisoner in general population. So praise Yah. This was a beautiful study, and as we can see that there are so many parallels that we can draw to our lives. We didn't show as much parallels to Yahusha, but we'll do that as we continue to talk about Joseph for the rest of the chapter, or for the rest of the book. So, but praise Yah, and this concludes our Genesis chapter 39 study. Shabbat Shalom.